This year's NATO summit was truly extraordinary, marking the first meeting of NATO leaders during U.S. President Donald Trump's second term. Hosted by the Netherlands, it was the shortest summit in the alliance's history, but also the most expensive, costing over €1 million per minute. It was also the most sycophantic, with President Trump treated like royalty, surrounded by leaders fawning over him to ensure the U.S. didn't withdraw from NATO. Yet it may have been the most divisive summit, with fiery speeches erupting protests, unexpected rebellions from nations aligning with Russia, and Ukraine, once NATO's darling, labeled a parasite by some. What turned this critical NATO event into a tragicomic spectacle? The summit took place in The Hague, Netherlands. Local media highlighted a staggering figure. Each minute of discussion cost the national budget over €1 million. More than half of the Dutch police force was deployed to secure the event, with the usual comprehensive restrictions for a U.S. presidential visit in place. However, not all Dutch citizens supported the scale of the operation. The summit's cost, primarily for security, sparked heated public debate, especially after the Dutch government confirmed a budget of €183.4 million, nearly double the initial estimate. This was a massive sum, especially compared to the 2023 Vilnius summit, which cost 6 times less, despite Lithuania's proximity to Belarus and Russia. The summit's record-breaking brevity was a key factor in its high per-minute cost, driven by Trump's preference for short meetings. Dubbed the Trump Summit, he was treated like a king. The Dutch monarch personally invited him to stay at the Royal Palace, despite earlier plans for a seaside hotel. NATO's Secretary General even referred to him as Father, using strong rhetoric to appease him. NATO minimized the agenda to a royal reception dinner the night before and a 2.5-hour meeting with 32 member state leaders the next day. The reason? Trump demanded the spotlight and grew bored with lengthy meetings after his speech. The summit's joint statement was notably shorter than the verbose declarations of previous years, emphasizing a defense spending increase to placate Trump. Cracks between the U.S. and Europe over the Russia-Ukraine conflict were largely concealed to project unity. However, arranging Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's schedule proved challenging. Since Russia's 2022 military operation, Zelensky had been a guest of honor at NATO summits. This year, however, he was sidelined to avoid irritating Trump, especially after their tense White House exchange. Zelensky, desperate for U.S. aid, attended the G7 summit earlier, hoping to propose Ukraine paying for continued U.S. weapons. Trump, however, left early for Washington due to Israel's airstrikes on Iran. At The Hague, Zelensky was relegated to the royal dinner and an industry forum, excluded from the main session. He salvaged a brief meeting with Trump, but NATO's commitment to arming Ukraine against Russia remained overshadowed by Trump's demand to raise defense spending from 2% to 5% of GDP. All NATO members pledged 5% GDP for defense, a political win for Trump, though implementation was set for 10 years, not the 5 he demanded. Some nations quietly admitted they had no real plans to meet this target. Hungary, sympathetic to Russia, didn't openly oppose the 5% goal, but refused to fund Ukraine. Protests erupted across NATO countries against the 5% target, with footage showing Dutch police dragging away demonstrators outside the summit. The fiercest rebellion came from an unexpected source: Spain. Despite Trump's 2018 threat to exit NATO unless allies paid up, 9 of 32 members still fell short of the 2% GDP defense spending goal by 2025, with Spain at a mere 1.24%, the lowest in NATO. Southern NATO nations, farther from Russia, tended to spend less than their northern and eastern counterparts. Spanish protests, sparked months earlier, condemned NATO's militarization, with slogans like "No to war budgets," "Peace with Russia," "NATO is robbery." Demonstrators accused Brussels of turning the EU into a U.S.-controlled military entity, diverting public funds from workers to weapons purchases while portraying Russia as the enemy. In The Hague, Madrid streets saw protesters chanting "Peace with Russia," "No to NATO," "Close the bases," even calling Ukraine a parasite. They argued NATO and the U.S. were humanity's true enemies, diverting funds from education, social services, and housing to defend against hypothetical invaders. Spain's prime minister initially defended the plan, but softened his stance at the summit, possibly eyeing re-election in 2027. Meeting NATO's demands would cost Spain over €300 million by 2035, potentially requiring tax hikes or cuts to education, healthcare, and pensions. Trump criticized Spain, though the U.S. itself spent only 3.19% of GDP on defense in 2024. He claimed America's contributions to European defense justified an exception. Spain secured a NATO exemption from the 5% target, revealing the alliance's unanimous commitment as flexible. European allies have mobilized nearly $40 billion in military aid for Ukraine this year, down from $58 billion in 2024, with 60% from Europe and Canada. Sustaining this while meeting NATO's new defense spending goals strains European resources as they stockpile weapons and funnel them to Ukraine's bottomless pit. Protests like those in Spain may soon become a familiar sight across Europe.